Okay, we are live. So hello,
Bam.
bam, here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Tara Tuesdays. I am Dr. Tara, and I am joined today by the brilliant and extraordinary Miss Shawna Murray-Browne. I'm going to let her introduce herself to the Dr. Tara community, but I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you're watching the replay, please feel free to leave a comment. We do look through the comments throughout the week and throughout the course of this session. I just want to say that today's session is a part two of a conversation we started last week with Dr. Natalie Edmond, a clinical psychologist who's trained in trauma work. And it's in response to everything that we have been experiencing around civil unrest, racism, white supremacy. One of the things that has often been left out, and Shauna and I were talking about this offline, is the focus on the traumatic impact of racism. It's just now starting to get I feel like some of the attention that it deserves. And so with that being said, with us finally starting to recognize it, I felt that it is important for us to have the experts in the field come together and really talk about ways to heal, right? Ways to resist the traumatization or resist re-traumatization and actually focus on the healing work that happens as a part of just our process, understanding that we can break this cycle. And so with that, I want to introduce the Dr. Tara community to Miss Shawna Murray-Browne, who is a brilliant everything, right? Thought leader, activist, clinical social worker, mother, everything else. So Shauna, welcome to our community. And can you introduce yourself first and then tell us a little bit about who you are and then why this topic is important to you?
Absolutely. Hey, y'all. Yes, you said my name, Shawna Murray-Browne. Born and raised here in the city of Baltimore. I know there may be folks watching from all over the place. I am an integrative psychotherapist turned liberation-focused healing practitioner. So my work is all around holding healing space to help us remember how we can heal ourselves, and then challenging and holding space for organizations, institutions, schools, all the places, all the professionals that hold healing space for folks of color, really shoving them, pushing them, nudging them into a space of grounding and healing themselves so that we can transform and transmute the way that we do our work so that we can actually get to a liberated experience.
I love it. So when you hear the topic healing from the trauma of racism, what does that mean to you in the context of your work?
So first I would have to say the entire context of my work sort of falls within that realm, right? What it means to me is holding healing space for folks in community to be able to feel like they are able to exist as their true selves with no filter. For me, it means holding space for parents to be able to sort of reflect around how they've been impacted. It also means healing from the trauma of racism also means saying the uncomfortable truths about how racism and white supremacy has been woven into the systems that we often rely on. And it also, healing the trauma of racism also sort of reflects a mirror back to me around what I need to continually do for myself to heal myself so that I can continue to hold space for folks in community, for mamas, for activists, for children, as well as the professionals that serve us.
Okay, I'm like, my brain is like, yes. But one of the things that you mentioned that I want to touch on that has been coming up a lot for me. So again, Shauna and I were talking offline, and I was sharing with her that in my work, I've been holding a lot of circles, process circles for Black and brown people and white people for organizations to process recent events. And it's been interesting because equity work, it goes on a spectrum, right? So I can't believe that this happened to, and yet we're here again, right? Like, I mean, and you have to hold space for all of that. And one of the things that has often come up when working with Black and brown people is something that you mentioned around that authenticity, right? That trauma takes away my ability to be authentic with myself. I show up to work as a different person, or that imposter syndrome. And so can you speak about when you talk about that healing piece and its connection to allowing people to be their authentic self? Many times people don't even know what that is, right? They don't even know what authenticity means because our standards have been set under this guise of racism or white supremacy. So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think most of us, when we think about racism and the way we've been affected, we can talk about like our hair and like colorism, like this issue of not appreciating folks for the shade of brown they might be. And we think, all right, no, I like myself, I'm cute, oh no, I don't treat folks differently because somebody is lighter in that regard. But what we really tend to not have the conversation about is how has racism and embedded itself into the way we've been sort of socialized to exist? How has the experience of historical the way that racism has changed over a period of time impacted the way that we parent? Mm-hmm. And so when I'm talking about really addressing the challenge that we have of not being able to show up as our full selves, is first identifying the fact that all of us have been impacted by racism, and that we are, if you are in a Black, a brown, and an indigenous body, you are making a decision, either intentionally or unintentionally, to show up in a particular way. And this has been because we've had it to survive. And we still, as we can see today, we still have to make these decisions about whether or not we're going to show up as our full selves, or even in our altered selves, and if that's enough to help folks feel comfortable. And so that could look like wearing a shirt like this when you usually might wear a actual kente cloth, not the kente cloth they was wearing when they was kneeling up there. Not gonna go there, okay. Or the decisions about what you're gonna do with your hair, to whether or not you show up with your entire personality, if you're bubbly, if you decide, if you do something called what we call code switching, right? If you actually will talk the way that you feel is truly the language that you will use, or if you're going to, have your telephone voice, hello, yes, no, a good and daggone well. That's not how you talk, though. That is not how you speak. And so we have to be clear that there are decisions and patterns that we've taken on to protect ourselves. And we have to make a decision of if that's how we'd like to continue to move through the world. Like if we want to move through the world in this altered state that is really stressful on our minds, our bodies, our genes, our everything. Or are we going to, navigate this space continually, and what impact does that have on our children?
When you talk about that, it always makes me think about like that assessment period. So for me, when I'm doing trainings, I often ask people, how was your race identified to you, right? And so for Black and brown people, it seems that it's identified pretty early on, right? We learn about our Blackness pretty early on. And you learn that racism is almost binary, right? People are racist if they do this, if they have Confederate flags, versus if the teacher doesn't call on you in class, right? She just doesn't like you, but we haven't really connected that to racism or discrimination or whatever. And so for many people, including Black and brown people, when we think about where do we start? Like, how do I even begin to assess whether or not I've been impacted traumatically, right? And I'm saying traumatically because I think when you think about the impact of racism, we need to think about it from a trauma-informed lens or from a trauma-responsive lens, so that you can heal from it. But how do people even begin that process?
So I think it's really important when we're talking about trauma. Oftentimes I can actually say, I think we as a community as well as systems reflect on it at the individual level. That is, has it changed your complete worldview? Is there a trigger, something that sort of allows you to sort of reenact an experience, or gets you stuck in what I think y'all discussed in the first iteration of the session, the fight, flight, freeze, appease, arrest, response, right? But I think if we broaden that conversation to collective trauma and historical trauma, then when we are applying that concept of whether or not we have been impacted, I would still say really clearly, like if you are living in the United States of America, and you have experienced and are allowed to sort of endure the beauty of Black culture, that the way that our culture has transformed over time has been largely in relationship with the trauma or the experience of enduring racism. And so with that, I would say from a blanket perspective, all of us have some level of trauma, perhaps not individual, but if you look at your family line, if you use what we call a genogram or a fancy family tree is how I like to explain it to folks, and you start to look at, that the patterns and experiences and how those have passed down over time, and you juxtapose that to what was happening in society, what was happening to Black people, what was happening with the policies, and you'll see, yes, you've been impacted. So that's the first part is you've been impacted some kind of way, hopefully not individually, but with the current experience that many of us are having right now, with the way that media is working, we are experiencing many different things. So that's the first aspect is I would say, I've not met any Black person, any Latinx person, any Indigenous person that can say that they've not experienced the actual traumatic experience from racism when we broaden it in that way. But when we're talking about where to begin, I often hold space where I do ask a similar question. When were you first, when did you realize you were Black or white or whatever you identify? Right. What was the story associated with that? But I hold space in talking about what internalized racism, or what I like to call injected oppression, from one of the elders in the community talks about, right? And how can we look at the ways that you might talk about yourself that is diminishing, and what's that relationship to systems of oppression, right? I usually sort of educate first around what internalized oppression or injected oppression is, and then invite folks to reflect on that.
Wow. And so I think for so many people, just hearing that, right? How have I internalized it? And then how have I shown up? When you first started talking, how do I show up to the world? But then how do I show up for myself? Right? Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's often a really overwhelming experience for all of us, because as I was getting ready, I was, sort of sitting in meditation thinking, sort of just requesting sort of guidance around ensuring that there's something that can be shared here that really supports folks in their healing journey. And the truth is that there's not any aspect of our life that is not informed by this racist system. And so you could pick any area of your life that you'd like to heal. So even if it's, I would like to heal my relationship with my body, right? Like if that is when you do a reflection of, how you want to take better care of yourself, and you try and get with the self-care life, right? Whatever, you could start there and add that question of how has the system of racism impacted me? Once you understand the concept of internalized racism, which is when the narrative experiences you have in your mind start to reflect what media, what mainstream society says, and even if you're not even aware of what another narrative could be, right? Like after you do that, you're just like, oh, you know what? I really need to work on my relationship with food. All right, well, so first of all, let's get them dark leafy greens. Let's cut out the red meat. Let's drink some more water. Let's cut out the donuts, the tasty cakes. Let's, right? But then once you get to that reflection, just exploring the relationship between racism, systemic racism, and food access, your awareness around your Black food ways, right? Like if you just start asking yourself, why do I eat the way that I eat, and how is that impacted? Then you start to delve way deeper into what it means to heal from racism.
Wow. I remember watching, I recently watched Dave Chappelle's Netflix I don't even know what
It
special.
was the like funny or not funny.
Yeah, it was. But when you were talking, it made me think about the point that he said about, you know, the Black community is not in need for any more heroes. You know, to be Black and to survive this system makes you my hero, right?
Yeah.
Like, and to hear you talk about this, and I'm echoing Christina's comment about that insight, just the insight that goes into one of the things that I've often talked about with parents, specifically Black parents, is the moment you find out you're pregnant, that racism, you are under, right? From what am I going to name my child, right? Literally, just the question, what am I going to name I want to give them a name that means that they can get a job. I'm thinking that at the moment that I find out I'm pregnant, I can't even explore. I mean, certain names are even off limits before I even give myself a chance to explore. And then how your parenting is literally influenced under that guise of racism. Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, right, it's like we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us do that. And then the other side of it could be, even if your position is, I'm going to name my child after so-and-so,
Right.
because I'm about to amplify this pride, right?
Right.
Like when I was pregnant, I very much so struggled with that. Like I was like, okay, so like I am Black power. I'm like Black, like, okay. But I really, what came up for me was, all right, when I started to delve into in my journey, like, and I know we're going to talk about, you know, why I talk about communing with ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what it means to ask these questions of how racism impacts us, and then to be like, all right, but what is it that I don't know then about my own culture? What has been stolen from me? I named my child Imara because Imara means strength, one to be reckoned with. So I was like, how can I name my child somewhere every time she hear it is me instilling what she needs to be able to survive in this world, right? And so I think either we are actively resisting oppression, right? Or we're passively enduring it.
Yes. I definitely, and that goes into that, like,
Christina.
Yes, that stereotype threat type thing. Either I'm going to fall into the stereotypes, or I'm going to push, like you said, but it's still impacting us. And then one of the things that it does then is that, you know, how the brain works to survive is that it normalizes.
Yeah.
And so when we think about trauma work, oftentimes we talk about how trauma causes the brain to normalize unhealthy experiences. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I see racism in that same light, where so many people, Black people, have learned to just feel it's an expectation, right? It's not a if, it's a when. Mm-hmm. And so how do we learn in healing work how to navigate through it versus power to it, or become so engrossed and enraged by it that it literally starts to eat away at our essence?
And so this is an important question, because I think first we have to create the space to be able to feel all of our emotions. And this is challenging. I mean, it's challenging for all of us, but I'm just, even in my own transparency, like I have not given myself the amount of time necessary that I think I really do need in order to cry about what is happening right now. Like just to cry, right? Or like Angel said, we become numb, right? So it is, I just got to get this work done. Can I just make sure my family's eating? And so when we decide that we're going to do the not only present day work, but the generational healing work, because, you know, we got to get into the epigenetics. Okay. But if you're going to do this generational work, then it starts with, I'm going to set an hour throughout sometime during this week. If it's going to be in the middle of the night when everybody in my house is asleep, or if it's going to be, I'm about to make my regular nail appointment, something where I'm also listening to something in my mind, in my head, on my headphones to help me like really be present with myself. If it's while I'm getting my pedicure, I'm going to be reading this book that's helping me reflect. The first step, I think, is making the decision to commit to it the same way you make the decision to eat. Because if we are to continue to regenerate ourselves, to live our lives so that we can fully be present and have children that have the capacity to be present, we have to practice embodiment. And so what embodiment means is allowing yourself to feel all of your feelings unapologetically. And yes, I do mean rage. And yes, I do mean sadness. And yes, I do mean apathy. I mean sitting with the wide range, noticing what comes up. But in order to do that, we have to create a container, right? Like I had to be like, all right, listen, I have a 3-year-old, y'all. I was married. I'm a student. I'm doing the most. I know I'm working on it. But I have to wake up earlier in the morning, one time out of the week, and be like, you know what? I'm just going to be silent with myself. And because a lot of us don't do that, because we're afraid of the overwhelm.
Yeah, right.
Right. And sometimes it's all right, I'm not going to do it by myself. That's going to be too emotional. Perhaps I'm going to do it with my sister friend. I'm going to call over my brother. I'm going to sit with my elder, my auntie, my friend, but making a decision around how you're going to create space to sit with the truths of what's happening.
I want to go to Shamika's comment. She's saying it's also the fear that if I allow myself to fully take in the racism, will I be able to come back from it? Lord knows I have cried myself a river this last month or two.
Shamika, yes. So that's what I mean when I'm saying in alignment with that fear. How can we, based off of your recognition of that, do an assessment of the people in your life and say, okay, if I'm going to give myself this 30 minutes to really be present with myself, but I know it's really going to be an hour, who can I invite over with their mask on? Because we social
distancing. We social distancing.
Right.
We survived racism and COVID.
Who can I take a walk with or run with that's going to just hold the space for me to cry? And then the other part of embodiment I teach mind body medicine, which is really ancient healing ways made palatable for American culture. Okay. All right. So it's our stuff brought back and repackaged. Okay. We're going to get to that later. So when we're talking about mindfulness, embodiment, or contemplative practice, breathing, dancing, movement, gardening, sewing, knitting, whatever, it's what can I do? What activity can I do that helps me snap back? So for me, it's movement, right? And I don't mean like watch me dancing to anybody's Afrobeat with the light on. Don't look at me when I'm dancing, when I'm doing my healing work, right? Because at first it's not going to make no sense. But can I just shake my body so that, because sometimes words and tears and writing and talking don't allow it to come out. But we, as people of African descent, those of us that are watching that are descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, we have a deep, deep power within us that we just need to rekindle. That is, we've always healed through movement, through gyration that has been made sexualized by this racist society, that has been made repackaged to us and demonized for us through the use of hip hop and the like. And so I think when we are creating that container, Shamika, it's exploring what people and what movement and other activity we can do to begin the ritual healing space for ourselves and end it. Like, how will I begin this day? How will I begin this time with myself? And how can I end it? And my body will begin to recognize, oh, I'm doing my shaking. All right, this is my time to wind down.
So I want to go to Christy's comment. How do we alleviate the burden of teaching allies the error of their ways? Understanding that we have work to do ourselves to heal, but I grow weary, albeit appreciative, of explaining how to be human to other humans. You want to start first? Yeah.
Christy, I know you don't know me, but we about to know each other. Okay. So boundaries. I'm very clear, and I had to get clear, right? Because we can't do the work, and I'm not going to call them ally, because I'm going to be really clear. I think that we have to go from allies to accomplices, or what Michael said, abolitionists. I don't need someone, I don't want to talk to white people that aren't interested in doing their own work. But I had to make the statement and be okay with talking to white people, Black people, brown people, indigenous folks, other folks of color, the truth. Tell them the truth with love. Like, we don't have to be mean when we are saying or setting our boundary. And so for me, right, I don't, in my personal relationships with white folks, if they cross a boundary, I let them know. Now, only in my personal relationships do I do this. I do not do this just all willy-nilly out in the public. If there's a white woman, and this actually recently happened, a white woman that means well, basically microaggressed me. She gave me, it was a microaggression, and my feelings were hurt, and I was angry, and I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to be passive aggressive, hold on to it, ruminate about it, be mad about it, talk to all my friends about it, still be mad, post something about Facebook about, right, if I was going to do that, or if I was going to say to her, you know, this is how it made me feel. I don't have the capacity for this. I need you to do your work. I need you to go investigate that if you want to maintain relationship. So that's the first thing. The second, in the other side, like on social media, when we see folks saying thing, the boundary. So I made a decision that I only work with white folks who are willing to first work with themselves. I'm not holding healing space for white folks. I hold healing space for Black folks, indigenous folks, and folks of color. White folks, there are other people who have the skill, the commitment to do the emotional work with them. So I think the question is for us to contend with what level of capacity do we feel like we need. And if it's none, I don't want to talk to them about it, you put them on notice. Listen, thank you so much. I need you to do your own work. I'm not here for it, right? And you can say that, you can sweeten that up if you want. I'm a sweet and bubbly person with boundaries. All right.
And I think too, for me, Shauna, like, I had to do my own healing work in order to hold space for them. I think one of the things that happens sometimes as Black and brown people, we feel this obligation, which is still under the lens of racism, right? To be the savior or the servant, and that's not our lane, right?
Yes.
Like, you need training to do trauma work. Like you need training to hold space for healing. If you don't have that training, then this is not your lane, right? And you will burn yourself out trying to give them something that you don't have. How can I replenish you? How can I educate you if I haven't replenished and educated myself?
I still have to say, though, I think it's hard to say that in the moment. Right? Like, we got to do, as individual folks, we have to do some real clear setting some intention for ourselves. And yes, the healing work has to happen and is continuous, but even being clear that there's a difference just in humans generally between the person that's ready to do the work and the person that's just trying to take up some air, right? Like, they just want to pick at your brain. They feel like they deserve it, right? Because whiteness has taught them that they can get free labor from Black folk, right? And so we need to set some solid boundaries. Yes, we do need training. I agree. But I think the other side of it, especially for folks that might be in interracial relationships or interracial families, where this could be coming up, you have to really get clarity around what your relationships are going to be interpersonally and what your expectation is going to be. Because if I'm married to somebody that's not Black, and I'm trying to explain to them what's going on, perhaps I need to I need to ask for some support, but it's also going to impact how we is living our lives, how we're doing, right? And so we have to set some boundaries and send folks to get support, and then get clear about what our lane and what we not gonna do, what we ain't gonna do.
So similarly to what you shared with Shamika about preparing for your ritual, right? So if I know, especially if I'm in an interracial space, and I have people who want to move from ally to abolitionist, I have well-meaning and well-intentioned white people who are, just want to know. I'm having a conversation. Do you think it's okay then to practice what that means? It means that I'm going to check in with myself today, and this is what I can give to myself. This is what I can give to someone else, and have that endpoint ready for ourselves in that space as well.
I think that it is really helpful for us to know how we're going to say what we're going to say so it doesn't catch us off guard. I think one of the things that has helped me and in my coaching and sort of consulting of other folks is if you're the kind of person that really wants to empower the white person, right? Because that's the other thing. There's a different level of emotional capacity, I think, across our racialized experiences. Even we're all human, but our experience having endured the level and the kind of trauma we have endured, we have a different level and experience of emotional intelligence and capacity. Capacity can show up in different ways. I think that coming up with a list of resources that you will just send. So if somebody say something, you know what? I was ready for this. Here's my list of resources for you, and let me send it. And so I think, yes, the language, but also like, what can you give them to empower them to do their own work?
One of the things that has often come up, so speaking of that, just empowerment, and then shifting the focus back to ourselves, one of the most common questions I have received over the past month has been from parents who are literally scared, like fearful of the potential impacts of racism on their children. I often talk about how, racism is designed to trigger fear. And for many parents, that fear manifests itself through the lens of control, where we try to keep our children close as a way to protect them. But it may be unhealthy for our children. How do we help ourselves, parents, whether it's parents? I've seen partners talk about it. I have a Black father, I have a Black brother, I have a Black friend, so it's not just limited to parenting, but just in relationships. How do we work to move from that fear space to a space where we are still allowed to be curious, right? Because that's a human emotion. That's a need to.
Yeah, one of the conversations I like to amplify is how we can be pro instead of anti. And so what I mean by that is it is important to have balance, right? And so when we're talking about safety and control, how can we be for exploration and joy, insight and learning, for instilling that sort of audacious personality instead of only being against harm and racism? How can we center more of what we want as opposed to focusing on what we don't want? And so a beginning for that for me is also often with Black and Brown families, talking about how are we centering the pride around our culture and our existence, and how can we center that in all the things that we do, recognize that all the words we say is going to be the way that they talk to themselves, right? How can we center that? And even if you're saying no, stop, don't do that, right? It's like, okay, how can we practice redirecting in a positive? How can we be pro? So now what you don't want them to do, what would we like them to do, right? And beginning that even at the toddler stage so that it alters the way we're communicating in the adult realm.
So then using that, because then what I've also seen is that the topic of race often starts with incidents such as this for both Black and white, Black, brown, and white families, right? Yeah. And so all families then start from the point of trauma to then teach about race and to teach about racism.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit about that and ways to not do that? I don't know.
Yeah. I'll give a really beautiful example.
When those things happen, but in a way that doesn't cause that internalization.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that our children are brilliant. So like when they're becoming aware of race of difference,
right?
2-3 years old, they see it, they notice. and they're so brilliant. They are watching the difference in the way that we move. Like, I know that my child notices that I tend to skip over certain aspects of Coco Melon on YouTube to get to the one that has the most diversity. Okay, she notices that. And so the ways to be able to do that, I think, need to be different developmentally, right? So from the very early, so my child is 3, all of her books center her. So there's this book by Bell Hooks called Homemade Love. We read every night, and she starts to identify, oh, that's mommy, that's daddy, that's me, right? Like, so she starts to personalize and humanize, like, be really deeply connected. But then when we get to other books, I'm asking, oh, what color? What do you notice about that difference, right? And making it like, this is normal, right? The same way that flowers are different, the same way that all of the trees come in different shapes and sizes and colors, right? But I'm juxtaposing that with really intentional, prideful narratives about herself early on, right? And so that's a 3, 4, 5-year-old, right? When we start getting, into the higher level elementary ages, they're seeing all of the things. So just ask them what they think about it. What are they hearing? What kind of questions do they have? And we need to tell our children the truth. Now, we need to tell our children the truth, I think, from an empowered perspective, right? And I think that this is challenging to get to if we haven't done some of the stuff that we talked about before. If we don't feel empowered, if we feel like I feel like I can't breathe and I can't exist, then it'll be challenging for us to be able to turn that on, right? But how are we centering imagination around protection, right? Like, yes, being pro-Black instead of just anti-Black oppression. Yeah, like, how am I teaching my child self-defense, both emotionally, spiritually, and physically, right? And the challenge and centering that. How am I teaching my child about, if our children that might be in the public school system, racist as I don't even know what, right? Centers the white narrative. Clearly, Black people just came out, and when we came out as slaves. No, enslaved, right? So really taking the excitement around what it means to be able to nourish this new person and curate an experience centered on their interests that amplify Black excellence, that amplify Native brilliance, that amplify and then help them identify themselves within it. And then the last, I think, not the last, but another thing I think is important when we're talking about cultivating a sense of critical thinking. So if you balance this information, right, and these knowledges with asking them to think critically and challenging them about what's going on, challenging them about what they see happening in the world, right? But pairing that with healing activities and exercises that you might be using to nourish yourself, teaching them early what it means to breathe, how to meditate. Let them do that yoga with you, even if they're going to climb on your back because they 3. Right. So yeah, I think we have to do this both and of telling our children the truth within the lens of an empowered perspective.
What about
do it for ourselves?
What'd you say?
And we need to do that for ourselves.
Right.
So watching all of this stuff about what's happening, what can we learn from history around how Black people have always resisted oppression? What worked well? What didn't? What's going to be our role here? As opposed to just absorbing the atrocity, right? It's like, all right, I got it. This is enough. What am I about to do to change some aspect, right? And have the real deal conversations. Like, I mean, are you thinking about moving to Ghana? Because I think about it. And that's fine. Like, have those conversations and have conversations around how we about to create a community that's real safe, or where we're going to be policing ourselves. Are we about to buy the block? Like, we need to think innovatively about how we can function from a liberatory perspective.
One of the things that you just, Shauna, is going to be a segue into one of the things I love to hear you talk about. In your work, you often, and you honestly, you were the first person I've heard to ever do this. But you have such a beautiful way of connecting where we are to our legacy and our lineage, right?
Mhm.
You talk about how you channel ancestors and our lineage into our healing work, and from a healing perspective, but just from our cultural perspective, because
Yes.
sometimes that gets left out of who we are too, out of our narrative as well.
Yes. So it's really interesting because I think it's really important for us to contend with. This is the question that guides all of my work, and that I often ask us to collectively consider is, how have Black people always healed? Okay, we know we still here, but like, how though? Like, wow, like we've endured so much, yet we still here glistening,
Smiling, loving.
and still finding those aspects of Black joy. And so we have these practices that are often embedded in our religious perspective, right? So those of us that may have been raised Christian Baptist, or perhaps were raised from like an agnostic or Catholic perspective. But if we just think about the ways that the elder women, the ways the elder women or older women, as far back as we can think, took care of us. So I don't know if folks like Kev on stage. He's like a comedian. Okay, so he cracks me up. So he often makes these sort of analogies where he's centering Black resilience through humor. And so you might think of like the onion under the foot or whatever, right? And we might be like, oh, whatever, like that's not a thing. Communing with our ancestors is remembering the ways of our people. It's reconnecting to who we are within our lineage culture, right? It's recognized, like, how did my hair get like this? And how do we get free? And so in spirit, and much of our spiritual practice through prayer, or if you remember going to your grandma's house and she got a wall of pictures of everybody in the family, from ones that like was just printed to ones that look like they about to fall apart. That's an altar, y'all. That's an ancestral shrine. I know we don't like to talk about it. I know, but it's the truth. Okay. So, with our cross, all of these things are connected to, for those of us that are descendants of those enslaved, these are the ways that we remain fortified. We can remember, we might have dreams, right? Grandma dreams of fish. You know what I'm saying? Like when we reconnect to those. And so I center communing with ancestors because I think that when we do create that container, when we do decide, okay, I'm gonna be with myself, I'm gonna do this healing work, some of our greatest answers can be met when we invite our ancestors that we know or don't know for guidance, recognizing that that's also a voice that is divine from God. God allowed us to hear that, depending on if you believe in God, right? And so I think that it fortifies us. In meditation, when folks are filled with despair, I have a meditation where I guide folks in imagining all of their ancestors that come in love and light to be around them, and ask them what can they see that I can't. And so I think it recenters our power. And what's power, because society, academia, all of these things have tried to sever our Africanness from our African Americanness. So I think it's central to the way that we can connect. We really be quiet.
One of the things you just said, I heard you just say it, but then it's just like wow, like how society. I'm like, but how you said, society tries to sever our Africanness from our African Americanness.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think about an essay from James Baldwin where he talks about the struggle of assimilation, right? Like our success is seen as how well we can assimilate into this culture, right? And what we have to give up in order to get that assimilation, right? Or in order to get those pieces of success. And it makes me think about the notion of self-care. It makes me think about several things that you said, how racism teaches us to work in silos. And I often talk about either the first or the only, right? And we operate out of that lens, and it creates this separation, one, from ourselves, but then also that community, and also the way to check in with ourselves about self-care. And so for many of us, self-care often has come after the point of exhaustion. And when we think about, racial trauma or triggers that occur, it goes out of the window. People really become consumed, and you said with that overwhelming or angering thoughts. And so self-care doesn't even seem like an option. And I'm going to go back to Shamika's point, because and Christina's point too, about sacrifice. But how do we start the process of not just acknowledging that I need to do self-care, but actually giving ourselves permission without feeling guilty about self-care?
So I think central to this, in alignment with what you just articulated about individualism. So I often talk to folks about our worldview and how we have been indoctrinated into a white, European, Eurocentric way of the world. So that's capitalism. That is symbols matter more than relationship. That is, it's only enough for one, and it only matters if I can count it, right? So if we juxtapose that to, I would say, Eastern, or even more specifically African worldview around collectivism, if we acknowledge around the ability to make decisions from the way you feel, you just feel that it's correct, and not needing to have something tangible to be able to make a decision. What we know is that the way we shift from that thought is through connection. So accountability is the way. And accountability happens when you got a person in your village that's like, listen, okay, you told me that we was going to go for a walk at 9:47 a.m. I'm outside, right? So you got to find that person that's going to get on your last nerve, but that you don't want to let down. When you center and where they know you, right? So it's not just there's this thing that happens. A lot of organizations and initiatives do this, where we have groups, but we're not really fortifying connection, right? So it's like, oh, we're going to do this sister circle, but I'm only going to tell you my favorite color and where I work. That's it. So when we start to fortify and identify the genuine connection, and then we identify, I think you the bomb, you think I'm the bomb, we the bomb together, and we can connect our goals together, we can hold each other accountable. And so I think that's the underlying importance is having a intentional conversation with a person in your life, or a person you can manifest, you can pray, you can set an intention for creating this. But the only reason I started exercising when the doctor said that I was pre-diabetic 3 years ago is because I told my friend Tiara, and she started getting on my nerve. And then she was like, well, I'm coming to your house. We're going to do it every Monday at this time. And the only thing that held me accountable is because she was counting on me, because she was looking for the conversation we was going to have while we was jogging. And I was counting on her because I'm a slacker. Okay. And so finding that complementarity within relationship to be able to move it forward.
I love this. And one of the things that was happening while you were talking, people were tagging their accountability partners. And I just want to tag them, let them hold you accountable for your healing work. Shauna, when we think about race and racism for Black people, have you found that in your practice and in this work, it has manifested itself differently for Black women and Black men? And what are some, I don't want to say like warnings, but what are some things that we should be aware of you know, as Black women or as Black men or as Black whatever we identify ourselves as.
Yeah.
That it's time.
Yeah. I think the answer to that question is yes and no. Yeah. So I established a healing space for Black women, the Healer Sister Project. And it took many forms. I held space for folks in community, academics, the women in leadership, mamas. And, you know, there is a phenomenon that I think is very poignant for a segment of our people, the Superwoman schema, right? Or Superwoman syndrome, right? Which is, you know, don't show emotion. I can do it all by myself. I have to endure. I mean, a few other aspects, but it is centering this sort of workhorse mentality that is informed by the historical trauma we endured when our ancestors or our historical selves were watching our Black men be lynched while we holding our child on the cotton field, right? And what that meant for us generationally for survival. Likewise, there's a concept called Henry Ism, that really looks at it. Was applied across folks, like Black folks, no matter gender, but most chiefly it centered the experience for Black men around, you know, this similar workhorse mentality, but everything being about work, right? Like, I will work myself to death. I will outwork you and I will do it, right? And so and this makes sense, right? Because who was rewarded, who was given, you know, the less strenuous or the sort of lauded gift and enslaved, right? The person that was doing the most, that listened to massa quickly. Likewise, when we think about how Black men have been socialized to center sex, this, you know, like slinging all the things all over the place, like that conversation that we had, and not being so moved or fortified in earnings, right? So, you know, not taking care of their child, they ain't taking care of their kid, like that sort of stereotype.
Right.
That is also very much so informed by how have Black men been severed from their families, forced to breed for those that were enslaving us, that required a sort of spiritual and psychological disconnection between sexuality, connection, sensuality, and love and spirit. And so when we consider these things from that perspective, and we understand that there was also not space for Black men to process their emotions because it was all about work. And so how does race-based trauma show up in Black men? Well, it shows up, they just want to do. They don't want to do a lot of talking. Now, of course, this is I'm making a blanket statement. Research says this does not mean that, you know, like, I'm not saying no Black man wants to talk about it. I'm just saying that the Black men that are able to sort of access their emotional selves have likely either been gifted or have been done some really dope work to shatter some of those other aspects of internalized depression. So not talking about it. And so some of the movement that we might see in community to center brothers talking to brothers, or acknowledging, yes, your sisters, you might be talking to you might be the best friend for the man, for your sir, right? So how can you strategically establish some relationships with some other married couples and then leave so that they can sort of have that? And then we're talking about the LGBTQIA community, talking about the experience of, you know, always having to exist undercover, right? It being acceptable for sort of white folks as a sort of erotic experience, when, you know, what we know from African existence, indigenous knowing, is that those in the LGBTQ community were actually considered more spiritually gifted because they could shift from feminine and masculine,
Yep.
and they could embody and really connect in that way. And so recognizing the ways in which our people have been silenced that are genderqueer, or lesbian, gay, or transgender, the way that it often shows up present day is a merge of those two existences, right? The things that we know or think we know about Black men, the things we know or think we know about women, it is a mixture of the two, often depending on how folks might perceive themselves. And not to mention the fact that our people will be out here being slaughtered regularly without ever being discussed, right? Because we think that it interferes with our womanness or masculinity, because we're clearly not clear about what femininity and masculinity are. And so I think we can all center in the value of a few things to keep in mind considering those realities. One is we have to practice honoring who we are and how we're responding to this trauma, and be gentle with ourselves first. That is, be just really clear. This is how I'm being impacted. These are the things that piss me off or trigger me. This is how it's showing up, and I'm going to be with it. And then within relationship, creating an environment where there's an understanding. That's how you're responding. I'm not going to judge that. Like, how can we be non-judgmental in this space? The second thing I think is really important to recognize when we go back to that racism impacts all aspects of our life, right? From the way we eat, from how we talk and the decisions we make. But it does that if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't shed no light on it. So let's shed some light on one. Just start with one. I know this is overwhelming, but you got your whole lineage to work through this. Not even your whole life, right? The things that I might fortify the hell out of my experiences right now, right? Like, oh, I got me a garden, Tara. Okay. Listen, I'm reconnecting to the work of my ancestors with this garden.
My 19th house plant from 0 to 19. I done propagated some
Listen.
I done named them. My two plants are called Barbara and Shirley. They sing to each other because they fight for the sun. I mean, I am there. I do my meditation around them, right?
Putting your hand, the science actually say that you putting your hands in your dirt actually is like a stress reliever.
It is.
The ways of our ancestors, right? So figuring out what that one thing is going to be, and just going in there, and just choose one. You don't have to choose 5. That one thing that you like, I want to work on my food. I want to work on my exercise. I want to work on the way I talk to myself. I want to work on whatever, my relationship, whatever. And then connect all of those pieces.
And I think too, giving ourselves permission to start with the
Sharon.
Yes. We can start with the easier. I don't have to start with the hardest place of my lineage.
No.
Food is my nemesis or the thing I have the most resistance.
Yes.
I can give myself permission to start with sleep. I can give myself permission to start with this.
Rest. We didn't even get to talk about sleep. Sleep, pleasure, enjoying your whole. Right. I think too, it could be either where it's easiest to begin, or where you will have support.
Yes.
Where you identify a person that got your back. Like, if this is the thing right here. This is right. And if we are paying attention to what's happening in our world, we set an intention that we want to heal, and we're not sure how. Spirit will show us. It's going to show up, right? The universe, spirit, serendipity, whatever you like, I love. It's going to show up for you, and you just have to sort of lean into it, right? Receive the messages that are around you, and you'll know what's being invited forward.
I did a session where I talked about giving up and giving into, and we often talk about that. Like, I'm gonna give it over, but like, what does that mean? Like, I give up the struggle and I give into the answer. Like, and that's what it made me think about when you just said that I give into the answer that I'm trusting to be revealed to me, right? And giving ourselves that permission. Shauna, this This has just been amazing. I feel like I am one of the several people gathered at the what is it, the geisha, the orisha of your feet. And so I've been trying to keep my professionalism, but I'm really like this. So we are at time, and so I just want to know 3 takeaway points. I mean, this has been so full in such a we talk about food in such a filling type of way, and I don't know if people can relate that, but I see people saying they don't want this to end in such a filling, easy kind of way, right? So yes, you've given us a lot of information, but you've been slow walking us, right? We go together.
You go together. Take for 3 things. Start with your breath.
Mm-hmm.
Notice it. That's the first thing. Take your shoes off outside.
Mm-hmm.
Let your feet touch the dirt. Ask the land how they're doing. Go to sleep. Just start with those, breath, communing with the land and the earth, and sleeping. Like figuring out a way to like sleep where it's not no time surrounding around it. You could just lounge. You could,
Mm-hmm.
I think if you start with those, all of the answers around how we heal will come to you. You have access to all of the wisdom. You just have to slow down so that you can hear it. You know exactly what you need to do to heal in this time because your ancestors been trying to tell you, but you be on Facebook. I mean, stay on Facebook for this though. But I mean, this is the message, okay?
Tanae for writing the 3 takeaway points. So 1 is start with our breath. Thank you, Tanae. Take your shoes off at the door, commune with the land, touch. And then 3, rest, slow down, sleep. Shauna, I know people are going to be in my DMs asking about you. Can you please share how people can connect with you? She's got a whole course on this. Her July and September has sold out, and we know why, right? So we just want to thank her for giving this to us for free, right? She's giving it to us for free right now, but she's opening up another course in January, and we want to get on the wait list right now. Like, as soon as we finish this, we want to get on the wait list right now. And so Shamia is on, and she'll write down everything that you're saying for free. Connect.
So folks can follow me on Instagram at Heal a Sister. That's SISTA, not ER, y'all. Okay. My website is my name, Shawna Murray-Browne with an E.com. Facebook the same, Shawna Murray-Browne, LCSW-C. You can, so there are 3 experiences. There are 2 that are brewing, and I'm gonna give y'all a sneak insight. Don't play Angela. Like you don't. Okay. So I'm gonna there's 3 experiences that are coming up. Yeah, Shamika, I know we probably can, folks. We want to talk about it. All right. So for those that are watching, there are human service professionals, there are therapists, that are social workers, that whole healing space for Black folks and community. Now, you don't have to be Black to do this, but you do have to be clear about the liberation for Black people. If you go to my website, ShawnaMurray-Browne.com, and you click on courses, you will see that there is a space. Thank you, Tanae. There's a space where you can click to put yourself on the waiting list for decolonizing therapy for Black folks. If you are a human service professional, an educator, if you be out here doing this good work, if you are an activist, if you're a birth worker, if you are any of those things, basically you work with people. And you know that like you need to recalibrate and reconnect to yourself. Soon, I will be opening up my program, Return to Presence, that's paired with my workbook, Return to Presence, a liberatory workbook in mind, body healing for human service professionals. So that's going to open soon. So go to the website and get yourself on the wait list. And last, if you are a Black woman, period, if you identify as a Black woman, period. If you somebody mother and you a Black woman, if you somebody grandmother and you a Black woman, I will be relaunching our healing circle, the Heal a Sister project, but this time as a nourished experience ongoing through coursework and Sister Circle to support you and relearning how to heal yourself. Again, go to my website, go to courses, participate on the waiting list for the Inner Circle as part of the Healer Sister Project.
Shauna, I am just so full. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Dr. Tara.
the wisdom and just, to me, and the kindness, right? Like the kindness in which you did this work. You gave us this information, the compassion. It makes like your ability to be your full self, your authentic self, gives permission to everyone to lean in to their kindness, their compassion, their own authenticity. And so to see it manifest itself in such a beautiful way. I'm echoing Sandra's comment. I can't wait.
Yes, Sandra, come through, Bill. Come through, Shamika, period. With the T. Don't forget the T at the end of the period. Okay.
Period. Right? So thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. I knew that, like I said, I told everybody we have renamed it Black Girl Therapy, Mental Health Magic Month, whatever you want to call it. This has been our third. I mean, each week has just gotten better and better with just Black brilliance and Black healing and holding this space. And so thank you so much, Shauna, for joining. Yeah. And so thank you everyone for tuning in. We will be back with our next Dr. Tara Tuesdays. And so everyone is just still talking. And so the comments are beautiful. The family part is beautiful. The family reunion going on in the comments. Yes. So Shauna, thank you so much. As always, let's heal together.
Yeah.
Everyone. Peace. Shauna, if you can stay on for a second. Thank you.